When fire breaks out, you have only seconds to respond. And in those few seconds, you've got to act quickly and effectively. You've got to remain calm and know your options. Often, the safest option will be evacuation and a call for help. But there are times when you can stop the fire using the right kind of fire extinguisher. Before you can fight fire, you have to understand it. Fire seems like a simple thing, but it's actually a complex chemical reaction requiring 4 things before it can happen. Knowing those 4 things is essential to being able to fight a fire, because if you can manage to get rid of any one of those 4 things, the fire goes out. The first thing a fire needs is oxygen, air, ventilation. If a fire can't breathe, the fire dies. So cutting off its supply of oxygen is one sure method for putting a fire out. The second requirement is fuel. Fuel is anything that burns, solid gas or liquid. Wood, paper, gasoline, butane gas, they're all fuels. Get rid of the fuel and you get rid of the fire. The third thing is heat. Look around you and you'll see there's plenty of fuel and air everywhere, but there's no fire because there's no heat. If you can cool a fire, you can kill it. The fourth element is the chain reaction that happens when heat, oxygen, and fuel are all present in the right amounts. When that happens, the chemical reaction generates the fire. A chain reaction is like a row of dominoes lined up, with fire as the last domino in the line. Push over the first one, and they all fall. Pull out any of the dominoes in the middle, and you stop the chain reaction. If you can interrupt that chain reaction by removing any or all of the other 3 elements, the fire can't sustain itself. Removing the fuel would put a stop to things, but that's not usually an easy thing to do. After all, it's the fuel that's actually burning, so removing it is tricky. Although in some instances involving flammable vapors, special firefighting foams can control those vapors and essentially take away the fire's fuel. Decreasing or eliminating the fire's access to oxygen is a bit easier. This is sometimes called smothering the fire, and it can be done by physically blocking the fire from the oxygen or blocking it chemically, such as with CO2. Cooling the fire is the technique you probably know the best. It's what squirting water on a fire does. Water cools the fuel enough to stop the chain reaction. Of course, if the fire is very large or very hot, cooling it requires a lot of water. If you use too little water, the heat of the fire simply evaporates water to steam, and the fire continues burning. A final firefighting technique uses certain chemicals such as halon to interrupt the chain reaction, causing the flames to die. Other chemicals are under development as replacements for halon, which is no longer manufactured. As you might guess from listening to these different techniques, not all fires are the same. Different types of fires use different fuels or different sources of heat. You have to know what type of fire you're up against so that you can choose the best way to stop it. There are 4 types of fire, and they're separated into classes. The differences are mainly in the kind of fuel each class of fire involves. A Class A fire is the kind of fire you would probably think of as normal. It's fueled by ordinary solid combustibles like wood, paper, cloth, and so on. It's the sort of fire which water fights very effectively when used the right way. A Class B fire is one fueled by liquids or gases such as gasoline, kerosene, propane, or even grease. Water doesn't always work on this kind of fire. A lot of those fuels can float on water, and so water might actually spread the fuel over a larger area and spread the fire along with it. A Class C fire is sometimes called an electrical fire. It starts in appliances, switches, panel boxes, and power tools. If water is a bad idea for a Class B fire, it's an even worse idea where electricity is involved. A Class D fire involves certain chemicals that burn at a very high temperature and which react violently, even explosively with water. Again, water won't fight this fire. It'll help the fire fight you. Knowing the type of fire helps you know the right type of extinguisher to use. We've seen that water is often the wrong choice, but we don't want to just avoid the worst choice. We want to know enough to make the best choice. Every fire extinguisher shows the class of fire it was designed for clearly on its faceplate. If a particular extinguisher can be used for more than one type of fire, the faceplate lists all classes for which that extinguisher is safe. For instance, an extinguisher which sprays water will only be rated for Class A fires. If it uses foam, it will probably be rated for Class A or B. Dry chemical extinguishers are good for Class B and C fires, and dry powder extinguishers are the best choice for a Class D fire. Each of these substances does different things to break up the chain reaction. Water cools the fuel. Foam can cool as well as cutting off the oxygen, and it has the advantage of covering flammable liquids without spreading them the way water would. Dry powders absorb heat, and they're only used on Class D fires, the ones with fuels that have a very high ignition temperature. Carbon dioxide extinguishers can be good for taking away the oxygen, but they don't cool anything, so they're only used on Class B and C fires. Now, you don't need to memorize all this information. Any fire extinguisher will be clearly labeled as to the type of fire it's made to fight. Never use an extinguisher rated for one class of fire on the wrong class. You might make things worse. If an extinguisher can be used on more than one class of fire, it'll say so. It's common to see extinguishers marked ABC, meaning they can be used to fight any of those three classes of fire. Once you know the type of fire you're fighting, and you know you have the right kind of extinguisher for the job, all that's left is knowing how to use it. All extinguishers have simple instructions on them. You need to read them before a fire ever starts. Here's the simple version. Use the pass procedure. Pull and twist the pin. Aim the extinguisher's hose or nozzle at the bottom of the fire. Squeeze the trigger and sweep it slowly back and forth, covering the entire fire with the extinguishing substance. Never block your exit while fighting a fire. And if it starts to look like the fire is winning, don't hesitate to leave the area, closing doors behind you to help keep the fire from spreading. Once you're safe, call the fire department and let the pros handle the job. If, on the other hand, you think you've succeeded in putting the fire out, make sure you're right. Firefighters are trained to know where a fire may have traveled. Let them check it out. Remember, fires often reignite after they seem to be dead. Of course, it's your job to know where the extinguishers are before fire breaks out, and how to use them. You need to make sure they're well maintained and that nothing is missing. Is the pin there? Is it clearly labeled? Do you know what class of fire it's meant for? If you know where your extinguishers are and how and when to use them, you'll be an excellent first line of defense. You could well be the difference between a fire that dies and a fire that kills.